This is probably the greatest Batman Superman story that I've ever read, because in this comic, Darkseid humbles everyone. So what this does is this initially picks up with Barry Allen showing up to Batman and Superman and telling them that he found David. Now, for those of you guys who don't remember the character of David, he was introduced pretty early on in the World's Finest run. And we get this kind of cool explanation here in the comic. This sort of catches us up. And we get David, who's basically saying, my parents invented this thing called a hypertime drive. They said it could travel to alternate realities. This was meant to be their test probe, and that the ship ultimately activates and David is effectively yanked into the multiverse. Now, to kind of fill in the gaps here, because it doesn't give us the greatest explanation, David's story was very similar to Superman. He came from an alternate reality, from a dying world, but instead of being sent through space and landing on a different planet, he ended up arriving in the main DC universe and landing on Earth. But he didn't really know what it meant to be a superhero, despite the fact that his powers granted him the ability to travel through various dimensions. And so over time, he found himself kind of running into odds with Superman and Batman, being reckless, getting carried away, almost killing people a few times. And so by the time they all kind of had a sit down and David was able to come to terms with what it meant to truly be a hero, his powers activated when the ship was turned on, and he was yanked out of the main DC universe and arrived in the Kingdom Come universe. Now, we'll talk about the significance of that here in a minute for those of you guys who are not familiar with it. But what Barry Allen tells them is that because Batman and Superman do not have the inherent ability to travel through dimensions, he's basically reconstructed the cosmic treadmill. And historically speaking, the cosmic treadmill was a device that the Flash would use in order to travel through time, but he's just kind of modified it to allow them to travel through dimensions. And for those of you guys who don't know how dimensional travel or universal travel works in DC Comics, every universe has a vibrational frequency. So if we use music as an example, the main DC universe vibrates in the frequency of A, which means Batman, Superman, the Flash, everybody in that universe all vibrate at that frequency. In order to transition to the Kingdom Come universe, which we can say vibrates at the frequency of C, that the cosmic treadmill will actually change the vibrational frequency of Batman and Superman so they can just kind of phase seamlessly into this new reality. But once they get here, what they end up seeing is basically like this older man who's just standing there in a cemetery looking at everything. And while Batman and Superman are still intangible, so they can't necessarily interact with anybody, we end up finding out that this guy is standing alongside Kingdom Come Superman. While we know Superman is Superman, this other guy looks like Batman. And in this graveyard is just what seems like graves of superheroes that stretch on forever. Now, let's talk about Kingdom Come, because there's a reason why all the superheroes are dead. So Kingdom Come is a story that was written back in the day, and it's considered one of the greatest comics ever written in DC history. But it was a story where the Joker had gone to the Daily Planet and massacred everybody. And you ended up getting this vigilante superhero named Magog, who basically went through and killed the Joker while he was supposed to be standing trial. But instead of society condemning the act, society celebrated the act. And in return, Superman walked away. He was just like, I'm done. And so what you saw was just vigilantes taking the law into their own hands, and society rapidly devolved. Now, there is a lot more to it than that, and ultimately it just kind of culminates in this massive superhero civil war. But the fact is, Kingdom Come just saw the deaths of so many superheroes across the DC landscape that it seemed like it was all just really falling apart. And so at that point, Batman kind of reaches out and he touches the tombstone of Red Robin, Tim Drake. And what it does is it brings himself and Superman back into the actual universe itself, right? It makes them tangible in this Kingdom Come reality. And so the first thing they do is they set out on the hunt for David. Now, of course, they also end up coming across Planet Krypton, the iconic restaurant in the Kingdom Come universe where everything's modeled after superheroes and like all the waiters and waitresses and the staff members are dressed like superheroes. A restaurant that I really wish existed because I'd go there all the time. But you get this kind of discussion where like they're trying to figure out where David is, where he would most likely be. But in the midst of all of this, a fight breaks out in the street. And what you have is David, who's basically operating as like Thunderman, right? This kind of superhero in the city of Metropolis, who ends up dealing with this woman who is more or less this reality's version of Atom Smasher. But we end up finding out that like hostages have been taken. And when Superman shows up on the scene, this woman is actually loaded for bear. She's prepped. She basically throws down a device that emanates this green kryptonite shield. So Superman is incapacitated like that. And then David immediately seizes control of her and just starts like driving this girl insane, like eradicating her brain. And that's when Batman and Superman step in once she reveals the location of the hostages, and David realizes it's the Batman and the Superman that he knew when he was back in the main DC universe. And where he initially greets them as friends, he immediately seizes control of Superman and attacks this guy because David has effectively become more or less a villain. And in fact, what he does is he just like screams and lambasts these guys and lets them have it, because in a lot of ways, he sees them as having abandoned him, right? Putting him on a world and then basically saying, you have no idea what this place is like. You have no clue what awaits you in this place. Very cryptic, but also very just twisted, and I wouldn't really say evil at the same time. But in the midst of all of that, the Superman of the Kingdom Come universe overhears this entire fight, and then Batman from Kingdom Come responds as well. But in this fight between what we would call Superman Prime and David for the sake of this video, Kingdom Come Superman shows up and immediately attacks him. Now, there's a couple big changes here for anybody who's familiar with the Kingdom Come universe. Number one, Kingdom Come Superman was never as powerful as the main DC universe Superman. A lot of that was because Kingdom Come Superman was more of a reflection of the old Golden Age Superman that we saw back in like the 30s and 40s, right? Drastic power differences. He also doesn't look the exact same, wearing the same kind of iconic outfit that we're used to. But still, in this reality, or at least the way this Kingdom Come story is done, he's able to hold his own. Not only that, of course, you have the older Batman who steps in, who's every bit as grizzled and really methodical as the Batman that we're traditionally used to. So while a fight between the two of them does break out, it's just as patient and just as calm as you would expect. Yes, they're physically fighting, but they're also feeling each other out. But where Batman Prime kind of gets the upper hand for a moment, you see this just kind of batarang come out of nowhere, only to find out that Kingdom Come Superman is joined by this reality's version of Nightwing, which is a character that I don't think we ever actually saw in the original Kingdom Come story. I'm not going to swear to that. It's really more headcanon at this point. But the other part of this is that Thunderman is basically telling Batman and Superman from Kingdom Come, those Prime versions are lying to you. They're bad guys. They're here to attack you. They're here to kill you. These guys are murderers, criminals, that kind of thing, right? So he's kind of putting off this air that like none of them are who they claim to be. And so even when Thunderman comes racing in with the intention of killing Batman, Superman Prime whisks both himself and Batman away and then takes them to Kent Farm, where Jonathan and Martha have essentially passed away. And there is a bit of a conversation where the two of them are just kind of mulling things over, but then Superman uses his super hearing to hear what it is that David is saying to Superman and Batman from the Kingdom Come reality. And basically, David's story is entirely different from the one that he told Superman Prime and Batman Prime when he first showed up in the main DC universe. Instead of it being one of these things where it's just like, well, I'm here because it was a transportation device through the multiverse and so on and so forth, he's saying things like, my parents and I came straight to you for help when my accident gave me my powers. We've always trusted one another. He's lying to them about his entire origin story. And then he says, he's coming. He'll have answers. He always does. Praise be to the way and the light. Praise be to the stars above and to the earth below. Because at that moment, Gog appears. No, it's not Darkseid. Don't worry. Darkseid's coming. And when he gets here, it's probably one of the greatest moments in the history of Darkseid that I think I've ever seen. But Gog is a character that I don't actually believe we've seen. That the closest we ever got to that was Magog from the main DC universe. And so one of the things that I want to point out here, and a lot of you guys who read Kingdom Come have probably already figured out, this is more or less a bookended prequel. That's really all it is. It sets the stage for what led to Kingdom Come even happening in the first place, which is kind of cool because Gog shows up here, and when he's talking to David, he tells him, calm down, David, everything's gonna be okay. I'm sending the superheroes to capture Batman and Superman Prime. And that's when you pick up with these guys who are basically being attacked by what is in this reality the Justice Brigade, but is basically the Justice League. And like all these superheroes, dozens of them, all come after these guys, including Cyborg for some strange reason, because that guy never serves a useful purpose. But the other thing that I want you guys to notice is we get this shot of Gog where he's sitting on this giant kind of technological chair. Now, eagle-eyed DC fans will immediately know what this chair is. But for those of you guys who don't, we do find out because we're about to go down the rabbit hole. So Batman and Superman are incapacitated quite readily by these guys. And that's probably a bit of an overstatement. They do put up a bit of a fight. They are able to hold their own, but they're also holding back because what they realize is that these superheroes here don't really know their stories and they're not really fighting to kill. They're basically fighting to incapacitate, which is a way for Batman and Superman to kind of keep the fight going on their own. And so what ends up happening is Supergirl steps in, she goes to attack him, and then Batman just kind of counters her move because unlike Supergirl from the main DC universe, this one never learned any of the martial art fighting styles that existed on Krypton, whereas Batman knows every martial art in existence, even the ones that do not originate on Earth because it's Batman and he's got infinite prep time. But of course, what ends up going on here is the Green Lanterns effectively use their lantern rings to keep Batman and Superman subdued, and then green kryptonite is basically used on Superman to knock him unconscious, and Batman's taken out pretty quickly. At that point, the two of them are whisked away and brought before Gog. And what Gog starts talking about are these things like, you may refer to me as Gog, bringer of eternal light. I have been gifted the opportunity to gift this world's heroes with ascension to glory. It's not a responsibility I take lightly. It's very almost religious, right? A kind of religious zealotry that goes into all of this, which is kind of cool. But Batman and Superman are essentially taken away and led to a prison cell by Kingdom Come Batman. And that's when Batman Prime tells Superman, stop talking. Don't say anything else. Because what's kind of going on behind the scenes here is Kingdom Come Batman and Batman Prime kind of have an unwritten understanding of what's happening. The reason for this is because in this moment when they're being led away, Superman starts shouting out to David using his real name. And that's an important thing. I want you to keep it in the back of your head because we're going to come back to that here in a second. But once they get into this prison cell, they realize they're not alone. And Superman starts talking about the chair that Gog was sitting on. His whole stance is like, you should know what that chair is, Batman. You should recognize that chair. But in realizing that they're not alone in this prison cell, the person who's in there with them keeps talking about how hungry he is. And where Batman's like, I don't really have anything on me, Superman starts to put two and two together. And he's like, this guy's not hungry for food, Bruce. He's starving for knowledge. It's his sustenance. I recognize this man. Gog's throne belongs to him. It's his Mobius chair. This is Metron of the New Gods. Now, for those of you guys who don't know about the Mobius chair in DC Comics, it's a chair that Metron would literally ride around on across all of creation. And he would basically just study and catalog things. And everything he learned was put inside the Mobius chair. So to have access to this chair means to have access to all forms of knowledge that exist out there, or at least everything that Metron has seen. And so when you switch back over to David and Gog, you end up finding out that like they both know this whole thing is a ruse. And it's kind of exhausting David to sit there and like put on this whole trick and these lies and all that kind of stuff, convincing all the different superheroes that like Batman and Superman Prime are basically villains. But at the end of the day, Gog tells him, this is a journey that we are taking. Are you ready to transform so that we can reach ascendance? David says yes, and David is rechristened as Magog and given the whole suit. Now at that point, we get the story of Gog himself, and we're basically told that at some point in the distant past, that Gog was part of a race that basically worshiped the idea of Valhalla, that he is a kind of deity, or at least you could call him that if you want to. Although Darkseid is going to put that to the test later on in this comic. But you get this really cool story where it is in effect this idea that war broke out on the world that God came from, and that where he did his best to plead that like they shouldn't be fighting, they shouldn't be warring, ultimately he was just kind of overruled. And so war and just total destruction overtook the world that he came from, a race of people who believed that the only way to die was to die in honorable combat. But for Gog himself, he was cast out into space away from his world and ultimately ended up landing on Earth in the very, very distant past, like millions of years ago, and has just resided here ever since. But something that I want you guys to notice about Gog, have you noticed how the different superheroes and supervillains, all the superpowered people just bend to his whim? They don't question him. They just do what they're told. There's a reason for that. But before we get into that, we kind of continue the story of Gog. And what Metron says is that in a lot of ways, Gog came to love the denizens on Earth. He came to see them as, in some ways, his children. And even Metron sort of joined him on this journey in seeing everything. And so what Metron did is he introduced Gog to the idea of the multiverse, something that no one in the Kingdom Come universe is aware of. They don't know that they have alternate reality counterparts out there. And so once this information was given to Gog and he was informed of New Genesis and Apocalypse, Apocalypse of course being the home of Darkseid and a land of just testing and pain, that Gog just stood in silence for 10,000 years. Eventually, he re-encounters Metron after having met David and realizing that David has the ability to travel through dimensions. This would give Gog the ability to use the chair to give him the knowledge he needs, and then David's powers to access the realm of Apocalypse. Now we'll find out why he wants to go there in the first place, because as anybody who's familiar with DC Comics will tell you, you gotta be some kind of fool to wanna go to the realm of Darkseid. Nothing there awaits you but sadness and pain, so it's a ridiculous thing. But you switch over to this bit of a conversation between Kingdom Come Superman and Kingdom Come Batman, and they start to sort of ask this question, is David telling us the truth? Is David really being honest? And when Superman responds by saying like, what are you talking about? We don't really have a reason to question him. And he even goes so far as to say like, I'm a human lie detector. Batman says, only when you're listening for lies. You don't automatically do that, but I do. And Batman even talks about how while they don't necessarily have any concrete proof about the existence of the multiverse, because remember, David never said he came from an alternate reality. He just said he gained powers and he came to them for help. So seemingly he's putting forward the idea that he's from the Kingdom Come universe, even though he's not. Batman talks about how the idea of the multiverse is theoretical and is entirely possible. And so he asked the question, when it comes to David himself, if these strangers really don't know who he is, then why are they referring to him by his name? Why do they know who he is? And so it's just a really, really cool bit of deduction on behalf of Batman. And between that and the tracking device that he put on Batman Prime while he was sitting in a prison cell and listening to the conversation between Metron and Batman and Superman, they have all the information they need to realize David's basically been lying this entire time. And this is where things get cool, because what Metron says is that this ascendance that Gog is talking about, it's not being led into some grand paradise or something like that. What Gog intends to do is gather all the different superheroes and supervillains on the Kingdom Come universe and lead them in a war against Darkseid. And he knows that there's nothing that's gonna come out of it but just sadness and pain. It'll be the end of everybody. And that's his intention. Now, again, we don't entirely know why he wants to do that, but he is doing it intentionally. And so what you do is you pick up with the arrival of Batman, Superman Prime, and then Batman and Superman from Kingdom Come, as all four arrive on the scene to confront Gog while he's making all of his preparations in order for like this great journey. And the first thing that happens is the two Batmans go after David, right? They immediately attack this guy. And then Gog himself it's basically just left to both Supermans. And the funny thing about this is that you have these really amazing lines that are dropped by like Gog himself, where Batman and Superman are facing off against him. And I wouldn't say that like they're really cliche or anything along those lines, but it is cool the kind of stuff he says. Like one of the things he says, for example, is he says, "Attack, do your worst. I'll personally send each of you into the afterlife with my own 2 hands," right? It's just things like that. Now, of course, that statement comes off of the fact that you had this conversation between the different Batmans, or really both Batmans, and David, where really Batman Prime was just trying to remind David of everything that he was taught by Superman, because David does still feel a lot of anger, right? He was yanked away, pulled away against his own volition, but Superman and Batman never came to find him as far as he is aware. He doesn't know they were sending Flash through the multiverse trying to figure out where David went to. All he knows is that they just weren't there, and he was just left to fend for himself in this place, being manipulated and controlled by Gog the entire time. But once Batman's able to talk sense into him, specifically pointing out the fact that Superman never lies, and Superman had always stated he had trust in him, that at heart, you're a good person, and you deserve the chance to be a great hero, it's able to bring David back, and it's able to turn him away from the influence of Gog. So of course, David ends up leading the combined forces of all these different superheroes and supervillains against Gog himself. The problem here is twofold. The first is the most obvious, which is that Gog successfully manages to activate a boom tube, a teleportation device between Apocalypse, the realm of Darkseid, and any place throughout the entirety of the multiverse. But the second is Batman, who's been mulling over everything Metron said. And he says, everybody needs to get up. These people don't realize just how much is at stake here. Metron all but confirmed it. Gog's ability to overpower free will, what does that remind you of? And Superman is just kind of like, he's just kind of out of it, not really able to figure it out. And Batman's like, the end of free will? Clark, it's the anti-life equation. Finding it, then using it to dominate the stars has always been Darkseid's one goal. Now, for those of you guys who are not familiar with the anti-life equation, it's literally this mathematical proof in DC Comics that if a person is able to control and harness it, they can quite literally dominate everyone's free will. People will just do whatever they tell them to. Gog seemingly has a portion of it, which is why he's able to influence the superheroes, but not outright control them, because technically the anti-life equation as a formula is just broken up in different places and kind of spread throughout the multiverse. And so in order to keep Gog from going through the boom tube and essentially taking the anti-life equation directly to Darkseid, both Superman cold-cocked this guy and knock him out. Now, the other reason why they did this is because they know for a fact, as capable as Gog is, if he goes to Apocalypse, Darkseid will kill him, and he will take the anti-life equation. And so you get this kind of bit of a reprieve before Darkseid shows up. I told you he's coming, right? You get this bit of a reprieve where like David apologizes for everything and Superman's like, it's okay. It's one of those things. It's just kind of the way that it goes. And he says, it's over. Come on, help us shut down the boom tube so we can figure out what comes next for both you and Gog. And this voice comes out of nowhere and it says, no need. And that's where Batman looks back and realizes Darkseid's here and it's too late. Because Darkseid, man, let me tell you something. Dude, Darkseid in this moment, it's amazing, right? Because Superman realizes Darkseid senses something, right? We'll do what we can. And then the other Superman says, the rest of you, run. Because these Supermen are the only ones that stand a chance against Darkseid. And even then, when these guys are like facing off against Darkseid, they're able to kind of like pummel him a little bit, but even they admit the best they can do at the moment is to like keep him distracted, to buy time. That's essentially it, right? Time to basically take Gog and get out of there as fast as they can. Now, the cool thing is this is where you really get to see Darkseid on display, because Darkseid's not emotional. Darkseid doesn't get overly excited and rarely ever gets pissed off. His level of power is so extreme that when he walks into a space, he commands the attention of everyone. And so in the middle of these two Supermen fighting him, he just looks at him and says, 2 of you. Interesting. Then he hits them with the Omega beams, and these guys, boom, down for the count. That's it. Right, they're literally out, just like that. Now, David himself basically takes off to hide, right? This guy's absolutely terrified of what's going on. And this reality's Flash steps in, which is, of course, Wally West, as far as I remember. I'm pretty sure it was Wally West in the Kingdom Come universe, because if I remember correctly, he was just like always running through the city and never really stopping or anything. But nonetheless, right, focusing back on Darkseid, even as like the Flash goes after him, he just says, "You appear to have something I desire, relinquish it," and just like smacks the Flash into a wall, right? And so like while they're trying to get everybody out of there, Darkseid is attacked by Alan Scott, the Green Lantern of this universe, and Wonder Woman. And he just says, "The bloodthirsty Amazon and the night ablaze, your careless ferocity makes fools of you." And he says, "For war is a cold game, colder yet is the grave," and just takes him out like that. I mean, just dominates him on the spot, right? And so he says, "I have come for the knowledge of the pretend God. Walls of flesh and bone cannot shield it." And he just takes out both Batman just like that. And he says, "It is here for my taking." And he immediately goes after Gog. And he says, "And you will not survive its extraction." Now at that point, David comes running out of nowhere and basically, I wouldn't really say tries to protect Gog, but tries to like defeat Darkseid. And where David says like, "I'll stop you," the response of Darkseid is to not even look at David, not even really even acknowledge him with any vision, just speaking to him while he's just looking somewhere else, and says, "Where 2 Kryptonians could not? How exactly do you plan on besting Darkseid, Lord of Apocalypse, child? There is no road to victory for a dust mote such as yourself." And that's where David just kind of looks around and realizes if the knowledge that Darkseid seeks is in the head of Gog, then the only way to save this whole situation is to kill Gog. And he eradicates him on the spot. And he's just kind of like, so much for him. And like Superman and all these guys watch this unfold. Now, where you would think that the day is saved here, you get this amazing moment because Darkseid just walks away and like goes back into the boom tube to head back to Apocalypse. And David, having no clue who he's really talking to, just starts chastising him, right? Like, "Don't you turn away from me. Like, well, you can't simply just leave. We're not done here." And Darkseid's like, "It is a common error amongst those who oppose me. You mistake anger for significance. Darkseid's machinations are galactic in scale. There is nothing to be gained by wasting my time on the children of Earth. Not this day." And where David just kind of flies off the handle, right? Talking about how like he's the hero, he's the guy who won, he's finally the hero that he always wanted to be. The response of Darkseid, "Against Gog, perhaps. As for you and I, we both know better. Until we meet again, you immature whelp. Whenever you cry out in your nightmares, it is Darkseid you will see." And the boom tube closes. And at that point, David turns around to see Superman, and Superman's just like, "David, what have you done?" There's a direct reason why Superman's doing this. Then there's the indirect reason why Superman's doing this. The indirect reason is really the more interesting one here. David has become a person of interest to Darkseid. Now Darkseid is monitoring this universe and watching it where he never noticed it before, never cared about it before. So basically, David has made this Earth a target. And if Darkseid makes a move to invade, no one's going to be able to stop him. So David may very well have just doomed his world. But the larger reason, or the public and easy reason why Superman says this, is because David just killed Gog in cold blood. Like, he's a murderer. And it's really just kind of Superman saying, like, you really are just too far gone, right? It's Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, right? You were supposed to bring balance to the Force, not leave it in darkness, right? It's that kind of a thing. Like, he's just being screamed at by Batman and Superman Prime, and even Batman and Superman from Kingdom Come. We do not do that, David. It's the easy way out. You have no idea what your actions could lead to. By taking the easy way out, that'll become your standard now. That'll become your modus operandi. And so ultimately, they just kind of declare that they've lost faith in David. They don't see him as a hero. And so David, as Magog, simply just walks away. Now, here's where the tie-in to the events of Kingdom Come come into play, because Batman and Superman don't have a means of getting out of this reality, but the Spectre shows up. Now, the Spectre is pretty much all of you guys know is like the embodiment of God's judgment or the embodiment of God's wrath. It depends on what era of DC comics you're talking about, but he's ridiculously powerful. And this guy could just send them back to their home reality quite readily, but they refuse to leave until they're told what happens to David. And we basically get this whole explanation by Mark Waid, which makes sense because Mark Waid wrote the original Kingdom Come story. And what they're told is exactly what transpires in Kingdom Come. David has started down the path by taking the life of Gog the way he did. He started down the path of taking the easy road, vigilantism, just killing people that oppose him. His actions will lead him to taking out the Joker, and that will set a chain of events that will lead to a colossal civil war between the entirety of the superhero community. Countless lives will be lost, and David will see that it's all his fault. And so what happens is Superman and Batman end up meeting with David at a future point in time after the events of Kingdom Come. And Superman basically tells him like, yes, I'm the Superman you remember, the one you originally met. Understand, yes, you screwed up pretty bad. Like you really screwed up, David. Like you really did. But the past cannot be changed. However, you can try to compensate for it by taking better actions in the future. Become the hero that myself and Batman always knew that you would become. And so while they're taken back to their own universe, you basically pick up with this being the reason why in the Kingdom Come reality, Magog ended up turning over a new leaf and then becoming a hero that led a new generation of heroes in that reality. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. I told you it was an amazing story. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and I will catch you all later. Peace.